Of course, we've had such wonderful introductions to our authors, but I will ask them, though, to well, introduce themselves with regards to their work and tell us a bit, about what they do. Whether you'd like to read something or not, of course, is entirely up to you. But Barbara, would you like to, well, tell us about your work and the sort of, what you're interested in writing, first of all? I mean, I know it's about writer's block, but
Hello.
we thought we'd at least talk about the times when they're unblocked for a while.
All right, am I blocked or can you hear me?
Hey,
Ah!
Ooh, gosh.
You were saying about my work.
Yes.
Um,
I don't, is that working? No.
No.
Would you?
Is this working here? No.
all right, now
Oh, excellent. Okay.
you can hear me. As you've been told, write nonfiction. I am not a believer in writer's block per se. I think it covers many, many, many difficulties that writers have, that any creative person has. And my work is to constantly write so that I can write, so I don't get scared of writer's block now that I've said there's no such thing.
That's fantastic. So lucky to have you on this session, Barbara. with no writer's block. But that's fantastic. I think somebody who's never had writer's block really needs to actually come and represent that side of things. But what about yourself, Palash? I mean, do you sort of struggle with what do you do with, and also do you get editor's block since the last thing you did was edit an anthology?
Yeah. Is this on? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. I write stories, and so it's different with different books. I mean, when you're writing nonfiction, that's different from when you're writing fiction. I think writer's block is not. You can have writer's block for maybe one project that you're working on. I've been struggling with this story called The Eternal Tenant for 4 years now, and I just can't find the voice for it. And it can get painful because you're thinking about it all the time. But in the meanwhile, I wrote some other stories. So what I'm trying to say is that you might be blocked with one project, but it doesn't mean that you can't. The other things might work out. So that's one experience that I have.
And Ryan, since you're the first debut novelist here, debut writer here, I mean, what about yourself? I mean, since you were doing it for the first time and fiction, and sort of, creating this thing, not quite out of nowhere, because Ryan has actually written an Indian adaptation of Don Quixote, which is completely fascinating. So he had, some sort of vague guideline. But yes, I mean.
So I spent a lot of time in a cafe in Bangalore, and a lot of my friends were these very old and obnoxious old men. And a lot of them seem to have been left out by all the changes that have happened in India of late. And listening to their stories over extended periods of time, one got a sense that with all this flux happening in India today, that there were a lot of people being left out. And in some regards, people felt overwhelmed, or people felt pushed around by what was happening. So a lot of these men cleaved to their mythologies, to their tradition. V.S. Naipaul called it a million mutinies now, where people, new identities form out of all this. So that gave me the idea to write the book, because Don Quixote was a man he was an idealist. He lived by the values of a time gone by, and he lived in Spain when it was in a period of decline, if you will. And that depends on how you look at India today. So in some regards, the character of Quixote appealed to me deeply. And do you want me to talk about writer's block as well?
Well, yes, I mean, I'd be quite curious, I think.
I think when it comes to writer's block, it boils down to sitting down at your computer and working at it. And then sooner or later, the block goes away. You just have to fix that time and do it. At least that's the way it's been for me. And I'm terribly lazy. So fixing a time and sitting down no matter what and looking at that white wall in front of you, that's the antidote to writer's block for me.
Thank you. That's rather heartening to know. And I think, Barbara, I mean, you and I were discussing this earlier as well. And, you know, do you feel, because as you said, you know, you don't really get writer's block. I mean, you know, sorry, you don't really get writer's block. But do you feel, I mean, is writer's block actually a real thing? Or do you think it is essentially just, you know, if it were any other job, it would just be called procrastination?
Writing is very scary. It's a scary way to spend your life. You sit down in front of a blank screen or a blank piece of paper, and nobody else can help you. And is it going to come today or is it not? And I think that fear, which is experienced by every creative person probably, that could be interpreted as writer's block. If there's a performance anxiety because it's only going to come from you. Yeah. And there you get stuck. You certainly do get stuck. I hesitate ever to tell students that, to agree with them that yes, they have writer's block, because that sounds as though there's a big, big metal gate and you can't break through it. There are lots of ways to let what's in your mind bubble up. And that could be. Ann Tyler, one of our great short story writers, said, I get my best ideas when I'm running the vacuum cleaner. And the point is to the cleaning house, Ann Tyler. The point is to do something completely different so that you're not expecting that. You're not looking for that. You're not trying to push it. You can go for a bike ride. You can go for a walk. You can take a shower. Don't just keep sitting there. Get up and do something different. It's not going to come if you're just sitting there getting more and more and more afraid. A lot of work gets done while you're doing something else.
That's great.
Yeah, I think Graham Greene also said something to that effect, that you know, his writing happens when he's standing in the post office queue. You know, I mean, it's your mind's still running and things are falling into place. So you don't necessarily need to be at your desk for the writing to happen. I mean, you know.
I wanted to ask, I mean, if it's just me, you know, I suspect it isn't, but, I mean, but, you know, when one is writing, and, I mean, I've not written a sort of longer work, but I write sort of reviews and, you know, essays and things on occasion. But, you know, if I write something that I like, you know, I just think, oh my God, I'm the most brilliant person that ever existed, you know, essentially. And I'm sort of, you know, just in a state of just, you know, invincible rapture and kind of, you know, I can hear a sort of, you know, like the Shaft soundtrack playing in my head while I walk down the street type of thing. And then if I write something that I don't like, you know, I'm a miserable, wretched human being who has, you know, essentially every decision they've ever taken is wrong, you know, and I sort of, you know, why did I not just get like a proper corporate job? And, you know, why have I taken these decisions that have led me on the street to, you know, just wretchedness and destruction, all for very little money as well, if I might add. So is that, I mean, do, you know, sort of people who write longer works of fiction and people who've, you know, who've been at this for much longer than I have, you know, do you feel this way? Or actually, Ryan, let me start with you. I mean, since this was your, I mean, did you have times, I mean, you know, when you were writing your book, I mean, did you think, oh my God, this is the best thing ever? Oh my God, this is the worst thing ever? Or, you know, or am I just unstable? I mean, I'm just curious, you know.
All of the above. But I think, at least from a more personal point of view, I started off thinking and believing that I had something to say. because I was sincerely moved by a lot of the stories of people I genuinely cared about. And I sincerely felt they were being left out, if you will. So to tell this heroic story of a very ordinary person who might have led a Homeric life, if you will, an epic life, though ordinary yet epic, appealed to me, and I wanted to share that. I wanted to share my experience with all these people. And in some regards, it's contrary to how do I say this? Maybe the politics of the moment, where, for example, publishing in many regards in India might look, in English especially, might look in certain directions. So maybe this did not necessarily fit in, and I was lucky enough to find a publisher and editor who believed in the story. So I felt I had something to say, and I wanted to share it, and that was my motivation, more or less.
That's very interesting. And does anyone else feel this way? I mean, do you feel, Palash, that, you have to write what you write because, it just has to be said? I mean, that something is either underrepresented or it's an idea that must get out there. I mean, that something is, compelling you to do this above and beyond just, well, I should write something.
Sure, I think when I'm working on a story, I think it reaches a point where that story just needs to be told. And there is an itch to just get down to it, and that happens. But I was also thinking, since we're talking about writer's block, there's also, I think, something called being too fertile, and then you reach a point you might be writing 1,000 words a day. But it's good to step back from it also. So, you might be writing 1,000 words a day and you feel, hey, it's all going well. But I just find it very difficult to sustain it just day after day. And I think it's just good to take a, couple of days off or do something else. And to, because, for example, if I'm working on a story, I'll need to go back to that story. But I can't just do it continuously, I'll let that story be for a few months. Forget about it completely, and then when I read it again after 4 or 5 months, I feel I have that distance. So I feel that you can get too far. It's good to step back, because otherwise you're just swimming in a sea of words and you can write very mechanically. The other thing that you mentioned was also interesting. I mean, it's very difficult, I think, for a writer to be able to tell whether it's good or not. I mean, sometimes you feel, hey, I'm in the zone and I've really written the most brilliant piece, and but you might not get that sort of response. I mean, I think writers can be very bad judges of their own writing. There's on certain days it might feel, hey, this is the best thing I've ever written. And then on other days, it just doesn't make any sense. And you said, did I write that? And it's the same piece. And I'll have 2 opinions on it. So I don't really trust myself. So, yes, as a judge of my own writing.
That's so true, that there are days that end with my thinking, whatever made me think that I was a writer? And what's wonderful is that I got an email once from one of our, I won't tell you his name, but one of our most highly regarded playwrights in the States, who said just that. This was after he'd won a Pulitzer. I'm a fraud. Whatever made me think that I could write, I've pulled one over on them. And this happens all the time. I think there are people in other professions who probably feel like frauds. I feel that being a grown-up is being fraudulent.
Oh, excellent. This is very reassuring to know. Now, Barbara, I also wanted to ask you that, do you ever go on writers' retreats? And, how do you feel about writing? I mean, what sort of value do you think they have? And, do you find, would you say that it's actually easier or harder to write in an environment which is totally different from, your usual environment? And as you were saying about the Ann Tyler thing, or Graham Greene queuing, hopefully not for cash, but that, can one write in that sort of vacuum when all one is expected to do is, wake up and write? And, does it, are they worthwhile things to go on? And, does the tone of what you're saying change? Does the material actually change? you know?
It depends where you are in the work.
Right.
If you're trying to escape it, saying you're going on a retreat and you go on a retreat to St. Bart's, which I did when I was finishing a book, and it worked very well.
Right.
But to say I'm going to St. Bart's, I'm going to go right, you could, it's more likely you're going swimming and eating good food.
Oh, yes.
So you really have to know exactly what it is you want to accomplish.
Right.
And believe you can accomplish it better in isolation. I have a place where I work, and I work very, very well there because I'm part of it's a writer's room, and everybody is so intense and so hard at work. You walk into that room and there's nothing you can do but sit down and get to work. I think places like McDowell and Yaddo, our famous retreats, are terrific in that they do the shopping
Right.
and all the cooking.
Right.
That's very helpful. That's very,
Okay.
to not have to deal with anything domestic, to not have to deal with anything except your writing. But unlike a retreat, when you go off by yourself, you have the company of other people who have spent their day exactly like that, and then you all get to sit around and say, I'm a fraud, together, and feel a lot better.
Right. No, because my great fear was that it would sort of be a bit like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, you know, that it would sort of, you'd just basically, just obviously want to hack your family down with an axe at the end of it because it's kind of too much the isolation of it and the sort of just being forced to do it. Yeah. But what about yourself, Palash? I mean, have you been on any? Do you go on any? Are you?
No, for me, I just work best in my, my home, my terrain. I mean, I'm just much more comfortable at my desk, and I think, I mean, it would be nice, I suppose, to go for a retreat, but I think one also ends up dissipating oneself. You'll be having these conversations, and and that can be distracting, and sort of constantly thinking about the craft of writing than doing the writing. So I feel it sort of gets in the way. I'm not, but I'm, I can see why it works for people. As you said, if you don't have to do the chores, just that makes things much easier.
And,
About conversation, that's such a good point. I'm always telling writers, students, don't talk it.
Yeah.
Save the energy
Yes.
for the writing. And you were talking about sharing. You have to be dying to share what it is you're thinking. Just it's bursting through. And if you tell it, you're not going to write it. It's dead. It's gone.
That's such a brilliant point.
It passes, yeah.
That's such a brilliant point, and which brings us also to something else that I wanted to talk about, which was, the enemy of writing, Twitter, and generally social media, because, I mean, I can't be the only person who sort of, in one's really egotistical haste for a good arty will, essentially tweet something that, I could have, of course, shut up and written a column about it instead, but I've kind of killed it now, by doing this. So, what is your relationship with social media? I mean, I know you're on it, but, how active are you on it? Do you feel that, you sometimes will tweet things or otherwise post things that you could have gone away and thought about and, could have been an idea in your writing instead, or, or that it's, is it dissipating your energy, or are you actually finding that you're, learning a lot from other people and, swapping ideas with like-minded people?
Well, I've been a photographer for a long time, and very often when you make your photograph, you put it out in the world, and it develops a life of its own. It might move people very differently, and I presume it's the same with writing. For example, on social media, on my blog, I put out a blog about this. Once again, a certain gentleman in Bangalore, an old Tamil Brahmin man, and a lot of my friends, where I live in cantonment, which is very English-speaking, very educated, they found it terribly boring. But I got more than 10,000 emails from people from little provinces and towns from all over India I mean, it was unbelievable, the feedback I got on that story.
Interesting.
So it had moved people in certain places, in certain ways, and social media allowed me to feel good about that bit of work, even though in my immediate circle it didn't cause anything, really.
Right.
So
Oh,
in that
interesting.
regard,
Yeah.
I think things are changing in India, where you can reach out with your creative work through social media in some ways.
Right. So
in
it's
some
not
ways.
all bad, basically.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And while I've got you on photography, and we discussed this briefly earlier, you know, is there photographer's block? I mean, do you get photographer's block? Do you kind of look at things and sort of think, oh, I just can't deal with this, or, you know, not this again, or, you know, or that you're just taking images and they're not exciting you or telling a story in the same way?
Well, there's client block a lot. And I'm sure a lot of writers will say there's publisher's block.
Yes,
So,
quite.
so when it
There's
comes,
buyer's block, certainly. Yes.
yeah, so there are lots of blocks. But when it comes to photography,
Yeah.
I think very often I do a lot of editorial and documentary photography. Very often what bothers me is when your picture is seen out of context, it's captioned or interpreted very far away from the truth of what it might be.
Right.
It's like the Afghan girl with Steve McCurry.
Yes, do tell us a bit more about this. I mean, of course, one knows who the Afghan girl is, but do tell us a bit more about
So in some regards,
things out of context.
you know, for sure. So in some regards, it's a very beautiful photo of a girl, but in many regards, it was used in a way at a time when the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan, when the West wanted to make people think of Afghanistan maybe as this place in need of rescue. I mean, the girl was adolescent, she was beautiful, she was green-eyed, she was a refugee, and it appealed to people all around the world. So in some regards, your photos or your writing, well, less so with writing because it's far clearer, I feel could be seen differently. So I'm beginning to think that photography, since you asked, is not enough nowadays. You need to contextualize it. It's become like language photography. It's like owning a pen, owning a camera. Everyone's got a pen, but very few people can communicate their thoughts effectively.
Oh, very interesting. Well, thank you very much. Now, Palash, I wanted to ask you that since, of course, you've been on both ends of the, you're, a writer and an editor, and you write fiction. What is the difference with, I would have thought that it would, writer's block could be something that would afflict people writing fiction more so, because you are to some extent creating something out of nothing, whereas with fiction at least you have some facts, and you have, there's only so sort of crazy that it can be. So, what is the difference between these two things? For you, is writing non-fiction, can you just, if it has to be written, can you just like slog at it and get it out there? Whereas with fiction, could it be that you kind of, get into a labyrinth which it's impossible to extricate yourself from or something?
Yes, yes.
Are there less dead ends in non-fiction?
Yeah. This non-fiction book I did, The Butterfly Generation, which was about urban youth in Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore. I sold the proposal, and I had a contract. But, with non-fiction, you have this kind of, it's a very different kind of blank screen, because you don't know where your material is. You arrive in a city and you don't know what to do there. Where are these young people? Which are the young people you're going to write about? So that blankness was terrifying, actually, but it was interesting, looking back at it. But, you don't know what you're going to write about, which doesn't happen in fiction, because, Carver said that, again, there was a vacuum cleaner sentence, but sometimes a sentence, he has this essay where he talks about just a line pops into his head, and then he starts chasing that line, and then a story forms. So it's not that he sets out in fiction, you don't set out that, okay, I have to express this. Sometimes it can just be a line that, I think she was vacuuming the carpet when the telephone rang, and I think this was a sentence that just didn't leave Carver, and at some point he just wrote a story just around that sentence.
How like a man, I have to say, to find that sentence intriguing enough. And there's another thing about when I write fiction, I write longhand on rule sheets, and I find that
I find that, because now with a story, if you're a novelist, you think very differently. Because as a novelist, you're constantly checking the word count, because it should be 50,000 or 80,000 words, and you kind of measure your achievement of the day that, okay, I've done so many words today. But now with a story, I think a story has an internal logic, and you kind of just, your gut, you know it when that logic runs out, and then the story just has to stop. And I suppose you develop that gut as the more you write. But I find that writing longhand always helps me. For one, there are less distractions. If you're on your laptop, you will check your email. You will check Facebook. You might as well check Twitter. Then then you might start reading something on Facebook. That will lead to some other link, and you can hours can go fly by, and you don't. So just writing longhand for me, where I'm not bothered about word count, where I just follow the story, and it's not a romantic idea. It just works for me when I'm writing fiction. So I suppose
Yeah. No, that's yes.
I think that works for all writing, writing longhand. It uses a different part of the brain. And there's something, you become more intimately connected with the words because you're physically connected. It slows you down. And then when you do put it on the computer, you have to rewrite the whole thing because you can't cut and paste. Therefore, the rhythm stays alive. You keep the music. So much music is lost with the ability to delete, paste.
This is completely. I mean, I was going to ask actually that do you also just feel that with the computer one is almost like too conscious of what one is doing because one knows how quickly one can rejig it. And so, you may have a thought which, could seem excruciating, but if you carried it through, it would be, at the end of the day, kind of turn out all right. But because you're on a computer and you can just, delete it and rewrite it in a second, you don't go ahead with that. So that is fantastic, actually. I completely forgot that the writing longhand is the answer. So I think that we should probably
and the
take
tools of the trade are also rather nice. The eraser, the pencil, the sharpener, that's the best part.
Well, there is a session, I think, tomorrow on typewriters. So I think, that sort of also, plays its part. But so now, should we take some questions? Because I think we've got where we appear to be, I know we started a little late, but I think essentially the next session is going to be starting quite soon. So yes, are there any questions? Oh, splendid. Do we have perhaps somebody with a mic? Oh, excellent. And we've got a gentleman in the center as well. Oh, sorry, can't hear you.
Okay. Hi, Fazia. I would like to know one thing, that I'm just started writing on certain issues. I may have written something professionally where the material was already fed in my head, and it's a professional write-up. So you know where to look for the material and get your mind organized. But when it comes to fiction, or you said that if you speak out your idea and your energy gets dissipated. So I wanted to know I have been thinking that I should go for a retreat and I should cut myself out from everything if I have to write.
Right.
Because on my desk at the computer, it's a little difficult. And recently I had an accident. So that's the time I couldn't get into what I was wanting. So I remember that if you write with your hand, it comes straight from your heart. So could you all elaborate on this? Because computer definitely, as you said, you go onto your email, something pops up, or somebody calls up, hi, how are you? What are you doing? These things.
Yes.
So out of these two, how would you
So,
Show me the way forward.
Oh God. So sorry, was that as in writing by hand versus writing on a computer? Or as you're saying, you're wanting to go off and write at a retreat, is it?
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
both. Because
Yes.
now when I sit to write, I'm used to writing a professional material.
Oh, I see.
But not a fiction or a story which is in my hand.
Right.
Or at times, I speak the good ideas,
Right.
but it doesn't come when I sit down to write.
Right.
So
yes.
I wanted to have some tips
Yes,
from you.
does anyone, do any of our fantastic writers over here have any tips on what happens when you have fantastic ideas and then you sit down to write and, you know, it's all over? I mean, you know, any thoughts here?
The first thing you do is work on the first sentence. Give yourself a week just to get the perfect first sentence, and then the rest will follow. But if you're not happy with the first sentence, then spend another week, spend a month if you have to. But everything hangs on it. The first sentence is like your clavicle. If you've got a very nice clavicle, your clothes hang beautifully, like Audrey Hepburn. Write a first sentence like Audrey Hepburn's clavicle. Then everything will be fine.
That really just must be the most beautiful first sentence ever, I have to say. So, Palash, any tips?
No, but are there any other questions? I just thought I was telling you about this Dubravka Ogresic. Maybe I'll read out a few sentences.
Oh, yes, certainly.
You know, it's a very tongue-in-cheek essay. It's called "You Know a Craftsman by His Tools." It's this Croatian writer, Dubravka Ogresic. So she buys this toolkit for writers, and she's a very fine writer. So it's very tongue-in-cheek. But she buys this. It says a toolkit for writers is a box of stiff cardboard, and then there are various cards about how you break writer's block. So, this consult the news suggests the card. I go down to the nearest kiosk and buy a newspaper in case I might find an idea for a story there, as the author of the kit suggests. Now, zoom in and out, it says on another card. Sitting on my chair, I put my feet on the desk and imagine that I'm a camera. I zoom in on my big toe. I need a pedicure. Observe a ritual, breathe, switch media, and this is very funny. She says, observe a ritual. It turns out that many writers have little rituals they use to start and stop writing. Jack Kerouac used to light a candle before he started to write. Somerset Maugham put on a special hat. My ritual is that every day before I start writing, I turn over 5 cards from my toolkit for writers and do as I'm told. So, yes. And there's a last one where I have to confess that the card I most like to turn over is the one that says, take a walk. Then I leave my writing and go out for a walk, just as Thornton Wilder, William Saroyan, Thomas Wolfe, Ray Bradbury, Carlos Fuentes, and many other writers used to do. The author of the Toolkit for Writers maintains that when writers take walks, they are not wasting time, but working. In other words, walking is writing in one's thoughts. That is why I take care not to return from my walk until the end of the working day. So, yes, it's
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the thing is that, you won't have a book at the end of the day, but, at least you'll be in good shape, which is something,
Yeah,
So, sorry, did we have any other questions? Yes, the gentleman in the front. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Hello.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry. Kushwant Singh used to say that he would write n number of pages or words in a day, and at the end of the day, he would realize that 40 or 50% of it is crap, and he would sort of delete it or discard it. What has been your experience, and B, how do you go through those emotions, when you have to discard or delete something?
No, I think it's a good thing to delete. All writers have a tendency to get very attached to what they've written, and and throwing a lot of it away is probably not a bad idea. Yeah.
And how, do you set out to write a certain number of words a day also, Ryan?
No, not at all. But I think it's important to have a good editor because, like they're saying, you get very attached to what you're saying. So it's very important that eventually somebody brings it down to a better size or to improves it. Well, there's always doubt. I mean, I at least am always filled with great doubt, and about everything, especially my own work, always.
Yeah, but I think that's why good editors are important. I mean, Clive James, I think, it used to happen in the past that, if an editor left a publishing house, then the writer would also leave because your relationship was with the editor. And, as I was saying earlier, that you yourself might not be the best judge of. So your editor, if you have a good relationship, that editor becomes your ideal reader, and that editor knows exactly what space you're coming from and what, knows your voice. And yeah.
Barbara, have you worked with, different editors over the years? I mean, do you find it is it difficult to adjust from one person to another, editor-wise? Yes.
Not difficult to adjust. I just follow. For the Times, I just followed my editor wherever she went. So when she left one section, I went to whatever section I would have written for car and driver for her.
Right. Oh, how fantastic.
But in the publishing world now, it's not like the Maxwell Perkins days. No editor is going to reach out to somebody who shows promise and want to bring that person along through their writing career. What they want now is largely dictated by the marketing department.
Yeah, absolutely.
And editors are moving around all the time. I have now had a different editor for every single book. So it's not hard to adjust, it's just assumed.
Right. Oh, how interesting. And it is true that, of course, once upon a time, one was just in a position where one could, as you're saying, nurture people through their careers. And, things which seem impossible now, that people sort of wrote 7 books before they wrote their 8th breakout book, and now it's sort of, really your fate is judged within your first 2 kind of, books, really, if you have a huge advance for the first one, then really that's that. If that doesn't do well, sayonara, essentially, or to some extent. But, as an editor, I work very closely with my authors, and I, would be horrified if they didn't follow me, sort of from publishing house to publishing house. And also, as you were asking with the question about, detachment, the sort of, the sorrow one feels at losing, something one was attached to, I find actually if you have a page of prose and you have one sentence which is kind of conspicuously beautiful, get rid of it. It has no place there, because it's really something that probably wasn't written at the same time as everything else and was kind of carried over from some other draft, because you've written the sentence which is perfection itself. But it didn't fit into the original place that you wrote it. And, you're just like, dragging it along and, it's just not working, So I think that, one does need an editor. So Ryan and I had, of course, now we've reestablished cordial relations. But, we did, virtually come to blows over this because of sort of, I'm sorry, yes, this is wonderful, but, you just can't have it there. It's killing the book, and I know you can't see it, but, kind of all of that. So, and I'm also kind of quite fortunate. I was just fortunate that Ryan is just so good-natured. I'm sure any other writer would have, just sort of really left and gone to another publishing house. But no, so it is, so I do think that, I do think that this thing about, one has to, I know that other authors certainly, because I get to hear their complaints, when one sort of says, oh, this thing doesn't work, that people are, of course, very attached to what they're, writing, so.
But I think hello. I think it's, I think at the end of the day, at least this is what I feel after this, my writing, publishing experience, is your book becomes an entity unto itself. And after a while, it does not belong to me. It does not belong to the writer. And it develops a life of its own. And come what may. And there's always fear. If you don't do a good job, the critics are going to savage you. If you do a good job, they're definitely going to savage you. So on and so forth. So there's always doubt and fear, and I'm still filled with it. But it's great to have a good editor, somebody with a nice, long broadsword.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. So do we have any more questions? Because I think we need to actually clear out soon. Yes. And also, are you going to tell us when we need to? Because I feel that the next session is kind of like in about 3 minutes or something.
I'll quickly squeeze in 2 questions. Any of you can take it. Have any specific writers influenced you and your style of writing? And my second question is, when you sit down to write, do you kind of have a story in the mind that you want to say? Or are certain characters inspiring out of real life sometimes that you want to bring to life? Are characters in a story more important, or the story that you want to tell kind of more important? I'm sure it's a bit of both, but I'm looking for more a precise kind of an answer, as well as any writers that have influenced any of you.
Any writers that have influenced you?
Writers start either way with a character or a story idea. And when it really gets exciting, E.M. Forster described this as you're telling your story, and then the characters start telling your story. They completely take over. And that's really thrilling. That is a very exciting moment. Sitting down with just an idea, nothing wrong. In fact, there's a wonderful book that was recently published in the United States that started, it was just a scene that somebody had seen on a subway, just a flash of a woman dressed a certain way. And then he sat down and wrote a novel based on that. So it's very quirky, very quirky. I don't think it's one or the other. What about you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the thrill is that you don't know what's going to happen. But it's also true that, sometimes you have a plan and you have this, and when you're very excited by you know exactly what's going to happen next, and you have to execute that plan. So, and you want to write out the whole story in one go, but you have to wait, because you're going to do the writing. And you know that, okay, this bit I'm only going to get to it by Thursday. And so it's that's something about. As for influences, I think as a story writer, I think Salinger's 9 Stories and Joyce's Dubliners and Carver's Cathedral. These are some volumes I do revisit from time to time. It's, no, Eudora Welty. Yeah.
Excellent. All right then. And Ryan, yourself, is it? You have already told us a bit about why you came to writing this book, but is it more sort of character or story-driven generally, the process in your mind, and also writers that have inspired you? And I especially love that all of yours are like in the 17th century, which.
Hello, I'll take that, thank you. So, a lot of the writers I like aren't necessarily from this time, like Faiza said. So, I like the myths. I like Indian mythology very much. I like Cervantes. And more than his book, which has his main protagonist, Don Quixote, I like the story about Cervantes' life itself, the life of the author, which was, he had a very hard life. He was a slave and so on and so forth. So I found it very inspiring. So when it comes to character, you said, is it character or plot driven? Yeah? I don't know really what the process was for me. I have to think about it. But I do feel that with fiction at least, you're revealing yourself in your fiction, to add to what Barbara says, in the sense the characters you choose or create, in many regards, are all extensions of yourself or paradoxes of that, So in that regard, it's a very personal exercise. You're putting out into the world your baby, a new entity that's a composite of various aspects of yourself, I think.
Well, thank you so much. And if there's nothing else, I actually believe we need to clear out the hall, as far as I'm aware, because I think there's going to be another session in about a minute. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you.